Please welcome to the stage Workshare's Chief Customer Experience Officer, Eleanor O'Neill, and Okta's Senior Director of Customer First EMEA, Bob Burke.
Hi, everyone. Even though I was introduced first, Bob came on first, but I'm sure you understand that that's Bob and I'm Eleanor. But I am Eleanor. I'm the Chief Customer Officer of a technology company here in London called Workshare.
Hi everyone, I'm Bob Burke. I'm the Senior Director of Customer First at Okta. That's a lot of words, but basically I look after all of our post-sales, account-facing programs at Okta across EMEA.
So when we were getting ready for this talk, myself and Bob talked a few times, and the profile of our companies are actually quite different. And I think you'll see that as the talk unfolds, but one thing, we agree on many things, and many of the philosophies that we share are the same. And so what I hope from this talk you'll get is you see how we've both kind of manifested in our respective companies. That's fair to say?
Yeah, in fact, I think this will be interesting, hopefully, for a broad set of you, because Eleanor's business is very on-premise. They don't have access to as much data as we do, whereas Okta is a fully sort of cloud-based business. We've got access to loads of data. So we're going to talk about how we take two very different approaches to health score and risk frameworks based upon the type of products that we have and how much access to our customer data that we have. One reminder I've got for everybody, please remember Slido. Submit your questions there. We're going to try and leave a good sort of half the time to take questions. We've seen that people have asked a lot of questions in other sessions as well, so we want to make sure that we leave plenty of time there. Slido, and the room is zinc. Yeah, okay, Eleanor, back to you.
Okay, great. So I'm going to just give a little bit of background on the company, just for context, really, and not to kind of promote us or anything. But we are B2B. We sell into the legal space. We've been doing it for about 20 years. So we have a mix of long-standing legacy products that mostly sit on the desktop. We have some newer products. So over the last number of years, we've been going through a transformation from the traditional selling software under a license model with support to being a SaaS recurring revenue cloud vendor. And so that's the background of our company and what we're working against. And we are smaller than Okta, so older and smaller. We deliver our products to the desktop as an on-premise server solution, and in a minority of cases in the cloud. And part of what that is some of those products don't readily supply us with usage data, and usage data has been such a topic of the day today. The other piece is we have a global customer success team. So when we are dealing with non-usage data rich products, we're dependent on our CSMs to gather insight about our customers, and particularly to drive a health score. And our customer success team are global, they're around the world. So one of our other challenges is consistency across these teams. And so there are two of the pieces I'm going to talk about. How do you create a health framework that's not purely based on usage data and also can be run by a team that's distributed around the world, and how do you achieve that consistency? So sort of a slightly antagonistic title to the slide, but go with me, it's by design. You know, one of the challenges we kind of, from an external and an internal perspective, in a B2B world, my observation is that customers generally want reliability. You know, they don't particularly want excitement. They don't want kind of too much awesomeness. A flavor of it's okay, but by and large, most of us are coming to work every day and we want software that works for us. So reliability, predictability, elegance is all kind of the name of the game. Internally, though, I don't know what kind of your experiences are, but our experience often is that customer health can be quite an emotive subject. It can be they're emotionally charged conversations for various reasons you know, I'm not going to talk about commissions and all that other good stuff, but, you know, it is driven by, there are heated conversations. And so you've got these two worlds, this juxtaposition trying to coexist for the benefit of the customer. And so we decided that in order to create a calm, cool space for us to deliver customer success in, we chose to be pessimistic. And so a customer needs to be in extremely, obscenely good health to be marked as engaged and advocate, but relatively minor things can push them down into the churn space. And you might think that might create an awful lot of noise, but in fact it didn't, and I'll show you later. We also introduced the notion of trump cards. And trump cards are actually valuable. They're helpful, they're important. And one of the kind of strongest examples I can think of about this is mergers and acquisitions. That's something that we encounter in the legal space. Law firms merge a lot. And that kind of creates, I suppose, a difficult space for us. You know, we beyond the merger, we can't guarantee we will be the incumbent or the resident vendor. We may come up against one of our competitors. And so that's where the trump card originated, was being able to log such a kind of a blanket, powerful card as that would throw the whole account down into a churn space and really hold it up and say, we've got to watch this account, we've got to put a game plan around it, we've got to be in there defending our territory. It works similarly for other things, like if a detractor moves. So law firms are also notorious for people move around them. They tend to work in the same space but for different firms. One of our detractors moves from one firm to another firm. It's another classic example where you want to be watching that account, seeing what the influence of that detractor is. And it's a kind of account that should be held up and looked after. And so that was really important for us and very powerful. The other piece I'm going to talk about is something that was inspired, and these are only kind of two elements of our framework, but there was another element that was inspired by one of my experiences. So I used to be, I'm a technologist, I used to be a buyer of software, and we sell multiple products into an account. So that means we can have up to 3 products in the same account. That can mean different teams working in there, and it means different stages of life cycles. I know there's this optimum and ideal of your customer always being in the same life cycle, but that isn't our reality. And so one of the experiences I had encountered prior to taking on my current role is I had been an advocate for a company, and I had been a very big promoter of them. But one of their account managers came in to sell to me, and he made a heinous of it. He made an appalling job of it. And very quickly, I went from being a long-standing promoter and advocate for an established set of products, and one bad engagement, a pre-sales engagement, we hadn't even signed any paperwork, and I turned sour. And that was, to me, a very powerful moment in my career. And so we took that, and we applied it to our own health model. And so what we started to do was we started to model accounts not just as monoliths, not just as singular things, but we modeled them as everything, every implementation, every product, every pre-sales engagement all had their own rating. And again, coming back to the notion of being pessimistic, the worst performing became the dominant factor. And that drove us a higher degree of awareness in how we engage with those accounts. It also always meant that we could go to bed at night feeling confident that we were on top of our accounts, our managed accounts particularly. And so that's, you know, in a world where you're trying to, I come back to this notion of when you're trying to create this idea of predictability, elegance, reliability, when you want to be known for that, and in the legal sector it's particularly important, when you want to be known for that, we started to create the space for ourselves to be able to deliver that service, to be able to deliver in that capacity, because we could think, we could breathe, we could perform in an elegant way. We weren't deciding in the heat and reacting an awful lot. And so they're kind of two of the elements of our health framework, and it's very much a relationship-driven framework that I wanted to highlight. There are many other aspects to it, but just to kind of point out that it didn't create a whole lot of noise. We didn't end up with a heap of accounts down in the churn space. What we ended up with was a highly credible scoring system that the whole company bought into, that was used by the executive team. It meant that it took a couple of things off the table for us. It meant that we weren't sure if churn was a strategic issue. We weren't sure if it was something that the executive team should be talking about because we were bleeding customers and hemorrhaging customers. We figured out actually we weren't. We also figured out that our customers weren't as unhappy as we thought they were. Even in a pessimistic view of the world, they weren't, detrimentally unhappy. We also kind of took the heat out of the operational day-to-day because we always knew we were laser focused on those bottom accounts. They were the ones that were putting our resources in. We weren't wasting vast quantities of resources chasing elusive churn that wasn't going to happen. And that was really powerful for us. We used that space, that lower space, to look for commonalities in product. We made some pretty key strategic decisions about our product based on commonalities in that space, things that were causing customers to churn that were product related or other things. What I'm going to end on before I hand over to Bob, so just as a nice kind of segue into Bob's world, our health scoring isn't massively data-driven today. It's powerful, but it's not massively data-driven. We don't have data integrated into it. That doesn't mean we don't have data. And so what I refer to here is what I would call a customer base health framework. It's not about individual customers, it's about the base as a whole. And if you look in the top right-hand corner, that's kind of what I think of. That's the space that makes our CEO smile. That's the overusage space. That's the customers that are, I wouldn't say abusing, but that's where we should be sending our salespeople because there's a conversation to be had there. In the bottom and lower part of the space is the revenue risk. It's where we're not getting enough usage, enough engagement, and that's where we ought to be, putting through our churn, our approach to churn. And you can kind of see it's peppered mostly with small accounts, so it would probably be a digital play in that respect. But what I'm going to do is hand over to Bob now, who's going to talk about a much richer data health scoring approach.
Thanks, Eleanor. I think afterwards we should talk about renaming these trump cards. I think there might be a better name than...
No, I resist it.
We talk about elegance and reliability and stability and all that. Maybe we could call them Obama cards or something afterwards. Anyway, I am the American in the room. Thank you very much. So I work with a company called Okta. Okta is the Gartner Magic Quadrant leader in identity and access management. We are a fully cloud-based service born in the cloud. We live in Amazon Web Services. We're a 10-year-old business, ex-Salesforce leadership. So customer success is a big part of our sort of executive team. We went public last year. We've got about 1,300 employees globally, worldwide, 5,000 customers, and about $300 million in annual recurring revenue. I wanted to talk to you just briefly about our customer first playbook because I think that sets a baseline for then how we measure health and what we look at from a risk perspective. So for us, it all starts with the learning cycle, ramping and certifying your team, making sure that our customers know what our product does and they know how to manage it themselves. Number two is deploying it, getting customers good time to value. This is really where our professional services team steps in, gets the customers up and running and live. We know that customers that take a long time to deploy oftentimes never get sort of fully adopted, and that's a big churn and health concern for us. Adoption is then where our CSMs pick up the engagement. They're there to sort of step up after the services team come in, drive forward value, make sure that the customer is using what they paid for, and then growth over time. This isn't only about revenue. This is also about expanding the relationship and the utilization of the product suite. So as we continue to invest in new product and functionality, that's still, again, where the CSMs are involved, helping the customers get the most and the latest as we release new product. We're a growth stage business, so there's a lot of new things coming out. Keeping them up to date with all of that, and then ensuring that we've got a really sort of key strategic relationship overall. So that's sort of our baseline customer, what we call customer first playbook. I feel like you could take this slide and put it probably in any deck that's been presented today, because all of this is a journey. We're all at different stages. There's no right or wrong answer here. So I'm just going to talk to you about what we've done at Okta. Happy to take questions as well in the Slido as we move forward here. But I think the evolution of this is an idea that you need to really grasp, because some of you are much further along, some of you are early days in all of this. The reality is, as we continue to involve this at Okta, probably once a year we sit down and make sure that it all still makes sense. And that's an exercise that I would encourage everyone in this room, no matter sort of how advanced they are in this, to make part of your regular sort of business cycle. And as Eleanor mentioned, one of the really important things here is segmentation of your customers as you think about scale. And we talk about segmentation, we talk about scale a lot at Okta, and we've heard a lot about it here today already. But I think point number one is the reality is you simply can't touch all of your customers. And so where are you going to focus your energies? And that's a question that only you can decide. But if you haven't started thinking about that yet, or if you haven't gotten to that point, that would be really step one. Where are you going to sort of draw the line? We realized at Okta, maybe a year or two ago, that the 80-20 rule actually applies. So if you took all of our customer base and sort of stack ranked it by highest paying to lowest paying, the top 20% of those customers, just by list, make up 80% of our overall annual recurring revenue. And that's a good place to start right there. And over time, we've tweaked that and we've moved that line up and down a bit. But that was the way that we started thinking about segmentation. How do you define key areas of business risk that need to be protected? One of the things that we've learned about our product is there's some aspects of it that customers typically get sort of stuck in and start using straight away. It's typically the sort of things that initially bring them to us, which for us are things like single sign-on, multi-factor authentication. And then there's other aspects of the product that they tend to think of as sort of like phase 2 stuff. So once they've got the first bits put in, that's where then they're going to come back and start doing some of the things that, to be honest, are a bit more complicated and require a bit more resources from that side. And those are areas of risk for us because we often see that once they get done with phase 1, they're quite happy and proud of themselves and quite content to just sort of sit back and maybe never get to that phase 2. And so protecting those more complicated parts of the product to get stuck in has become a really key focus for our CSMs over the past, I would say, 6 months or so. How do you adapt in a high-growth environment sort of goes along with how do you evolve as your product lines shift. We are all here today because we're part of this digital revolution that's happening. You know, we heard from the Cisco guys talking earlier today about having shifted from being in a hardware business to a software business. Even you would think with a big name like Cisco that they were sort of a old school staid business. No, in fact, they're doing all sorts of really cool, innovative things. You know, Okta is a high growth business. We've got people from all across the gamut here, and this applies to everybody because we're all reinventing ourselves to keep up with the industry, to keep up with the technology, and to keep up with our customers. And so how are you going to continue to shift your strategies as your business lines change, as your customers evolve? For us, it has a lot to do with the complexity of our customers and the regional distribution of our customers, and how are we identifying those areas of risk and potential churn there. This one is very dear to my heart. What happens when budgets tighten and suddenly somebody says, actually, it's more important for us to really start growing like mad, and we're going to take money away from our customer success budget and start putting it more towards our sales budget. I'm sure that's never happened to anybody here in this room. But all of a sudden, you've got a whole process in place that's been built around certain expectations, about a certain number of dollars, around a certain hiring strategy, around certain attach rates, and then all of a sudden you've been told, actually, no, you've got to make do with less, and that means CSMs have to take on more accounts, and there's maybe less PS dollars to invest in certain areas. And so being nimble, being able to adapt, and being ready to sort of, to be honest, ask more of your team as those challenges come up has been really critical for us. And then, as I mentioned originally, you've got to continue to redefine this and look at it over time. So for us at Okta, this sort of goes back, let's say, 3 or 4 years now. We really started with V1, quite simply measuring customer adoption. As I mentioned, we're a fully cloud-based business. We have all of our customer data. It's all in Tableau. We can go in and see everything that our customers are doing on a regular basis. For us, it was simply about seeing how well are they using the product, are they healthy, are they not, full stop. At a certain point, we realized there was a lot more to it than that. It had also a lot to do with the customer engagement. And that's also a bit more sort of probably in alignment with a lot of the challenges that Eleanor has and some of the problems that she's solved in terms of taking a bit more of a human approach to understanding how we're working with that customer. And I'm going to come on to some of the detail of what that looks like here in a minute. And now, more and more, and to be honest, we have some heated debates about this internally, really, our customer health score framework is becoming a renewals forecasting tool. It's really about how likely do we think that this customer is going to renew without any churn. And there's a subtle difference there, because in the past, it was really measuring pure, quote unquote, pure health. Of course, with the view on a healthy renewal. But now it's actually becoming an integrated part, this tool, of our actual forecasting and renewals process, with renewals people actively engaged with it, so that as we continue to grow the business, we get more accurate and better at forecasting. I'm going to take you through my framework real quick, and we'll come on to questions here in just a few minutes. So this is what our current health framework looks like. It starts with utilization, which again, as I mentioned on the previous slide, was sort of our first version of things. And so this has a lot of sort of buzzwords around our product and what it means, but a good part of it has to do with our single sign-on utilization. Some of it has to do with what we call our platform customers. Those are the ones that are developers that are building around our product. LCM has to do with another aspect of the product. How are they using that parts? How many application integrate? This is a very data, techie, utilization focus of the whole score. And you can see here, you know, once we get to the big picture view overall, this really does make up the majority of the score. But then as we've evolved it over time, we added sort of step 2, which was the engagement side of things. So 2 of the, what we see are key drivers or signifiers, I should say, of health. Number 1, does the customer have a current professional services engagement, and is that engagement on track? As simple as that. Yes? Great. That's 10 points that they've got on the green side of things. If not, 10 points against it. And then the support engagement. This is another one that we've talked about a lot back and forth. A lot of people feel like if customers are using support a lot, that's a bad thing. I take the completely opposite view because we know that any customer that's actively engaged with our product, they need help from time to time. And if they are not reaching out and submitting a support ticket on a regular basis, that's a negative thing. That's a sign of a lack of engagement overall. So making sure that customers are regularly engaging with support is a key metric for us of overall health. Now, if they're submitting 10 a day, that's probably another concern that you'll have to take into account, but key point there. And then a bit around insights, and then this is where more of the human side of things comes into play. So we have a concept of a red account. That's where anytime anyone in the organization feels like there's an account at risk, they can open a red account. It's a process that we use in Salesforce. We've got, weekly, regular occurring red account meetings where we sit down with management, we talk about what's going on with the account, put together a strategic plan to get that customer back on track. So is there a current red account open for the customer? Yes, that negatively affects their health score. And then there's a manual override functionality, which is where a customer success manager can come and provide some human data to balance things out, to say, actually, there's a little bit of information here that's not showing up in all of this data that we've got. I'm going to add that bit of influence to it overall. And then a final thing, visibility. These bits are not scored. These do not come into play in the health score, but they have visibility to the rest of the team. So has the customer responded to a customer sentiment survey recently? And has it been positive or negative? We're a little bit iffy on sentiment surveys at Okta. So we don't take them too seriously because as we get into them, we often see that it's not as valuable of information, but we still want to know how they've responded so that we can choose to take action or not. 2, has the customer taken training? That's a pretty critical thing overall, so have they done that or not? Number 3, are they engaged in our community activity? That again shows overall engagement. It's not critical to health, but it's another indicator that we take into consideration. I'm way over time, so I'm going to move really quickly. This is what it looks like. We do use Gainsight. This is not a plug for Gainsight, but this is a bit, just the utilization bit of how it scores out, so you can sort of see graphically of what some of this stuff looks like for us. Other things that matter that you might want to think about and consider that we talk about all the time at Okta. So are your customers participating in user groups? Are they referenceable? Dan talked about advocacy up here earlier today. Are they a multiple time buyer? Customers that buy more than once, you should take note of them and stay very close to them because they'll probably go on and buy again somewhere else. Contract length, are they serial sort of 1-year contract buyers? That's an area of concern. Do they do stuff like this? Do they come to your conferences and stand up and say nice things about you? And then executive sponsorship overall. We know that the higher up that we get in an account, the stronger the relationship is overall. So other things just to keep into consideration. I've flown through those last bits, but that brings us on to the takeaway slides, and we'll get on to your questions here in a moment. So, Eleanor, back to you.
Sure. So one thing that myself and Bob thoroughly agreed on when we were talking about this was that scalability is crucial, particularly if you're a company that's aspiring to grow or is growing. And from our perspective, so that was our first takeaway, really think about scale in how you build this thing and construct it. From the workshare perspective, rules and black and white definitions are really important, particularly when you've got CSMs interpreting accounts, managed accounts, and that's where the Obama cards came in. Because they are black and white. You just apply them, there's no thinking, and it saves time, and it's much easier to go kind of to work on during your week, and it's easier for CSMs and when their life is easier, my life is easier, and that's it.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, for us as a really high growth business, scaling this, continuing to iterate on it, making sure that you segment, and then go back and reevaluate your segmentation lines once or twice a year to make sure that the resources that you've got, you can functionally apply towards your goals. It's a critical part of all of this.
Great. Shall we switch to Slido?
We should switch to Slido. Yes, we should. Okay. So, I'm going to read the first question,
Please do.
and I'm going to let you answer the first question.
Oh, that was tricky.
All right, cool. So, Eleanor, once you've identified an at-risk customer, what are some of the tools that you deploy to avoid the churn?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And something that, I'm going to answer it from the small scale side of things. It might be interesting for Bob to also answer it from a bigger size company. But at the size we've actually been very successful in this space, partly because we reduced the noise. So as one of my slides pointed out, we managed to kind of really constrict the focus on churn accounts to a small targeted number of accounts and not get too caught up in noise. That was the first battle on this. But after that, we tend to form tiger teams. We investigate the account, we learn as much as we can about the account, we examine the relationships, but the fundamental mechanism for being successful in preventing the churn is a group of people who are going to form a strategy around that account. And I'm generally talking about the big accounts. I'm not talking, and I'm assuming from this question, because it's a singular customer in the question, it's an at-risk customer, we're talking about big customers. But we very much form tiger teams around it, and we think about, to use Dan Steinman's phrase I hear him use all the time, we think about the outcome. We get very focused on the outcome that customer is trying to get to. Sometimes we reverse things. We take 2 steps back in order to take 1 step forward. But the core tool, and it's not technology, and it's not anything else, and it's probably not that snazzy, but it is a group of a very appropriate people to that account.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned it earlier. We're heavy Salesforce users. We use Salesforce to manage our whole Red account process. We have a pretty robust framework that we've built into Salesforce in terms of opening, documenting, categorizing, assigning responsibility within a Red account for us internally. And we have visibility across all of those, across the entire organization. So while Salesforce sort of becomes the structure and the tool that we use to manage and drive towards an end result, and that's one key part of this, is defining what the exit criteria is for a customer that's been flagged at risk, because you can continue to sort of talk about these things ad nauseum, week in and week out, making sure that you can clearly sort of say, we're done once you've gotten to a certain outcome is critical here. But I think the main tools that we use internally are our people. It's our human resources, because once one of these things gets flagged up, we can immediately get literally C-level visibility to it immediately. We can get access to our product team if it's something product related. We can escalate up to support management immediately. So it's the mechanism to get the right people involved to bring to bear the proper result that's the critical thing for us at Okta. Eleanor.
Should we take the next one? So the next question, how do you calculate health score for a customer who uses more than one product? Do all products weigh equally? Very good question.
Yeah, cool. Good question. So no, they don't all weigh equally, because the reality is customers pay more for certain products than others. And that's just the hard reality of, I think, a lot of this stuff. So we do, that was sort of, as I was mentioning earlier, have a specific program now just focusing on one of those parts of the product that, as I said, tends to become sort of a second or third stage part of the application suite that customers are focused on, but it tends to make up a significant portion of their spend overall. And so we've become much more, I guess, sophisticated about this internally, really, in terms of focusing and building programs around making sure that we focus on the areas that we can recognize there's more revenue at risk than others. I don't know if it's the same for you.
Yeah, I'm probably inclined to agree. Definitely revenue per product has an impact. And And also, I mean, it's not just the product itself, it's whether the customer is trialing one thing or doing a POC with one, and therefore that's a smaller amount of money than that they've got a full-blown deployment, they've got 5,000 seats of one of our long-standing products, but they're kind of dabbling with one of our newer products. I mean, for me, you know, thinking customer success, customer experience, you know, I think it's really important to understand what's going on with each of the products and each of the implementations and what are the dynamics in that customer account. But ultimately, the aim is to retain the whole account, not for partial churn or complete churn, but you know, the end game is to keep the whole customer for the most amount of value possible. So it's, you know, I would argue that all products weigh equally because you want to encourage the expansion revenue, you want to keep the renewal, you want all that good stuff going on. However, if it came to the crunch, you'd probably, you know, you'd lose the lower revenue product.
Yeah.
Would be my view.
Yep. I think this next one is really interesting. Let's move on to what additional risk factors would you recommend to consider if usage and adoption is high, but the account churns in the end? That's a really good one. I should pull up one of my CSMs and have them talk about some of those that we've seen in the past. But I think the biggest factor that we've seen in these sorts of scenarios where everything looks healthy, the customer is well adopted, all of the signals are positive, and then it comes time for a renewal conversation, and all of a sudden the customer wants to churn or they want to significantly reduce their spend with us. Most of the time we find that those are situations largely out of our control, but I would say the number one factor in all of those things for us has been some sort of restructuring, reorganization, or M&A of the customer. The customer's been bought by a larger organization that's using a competitive product, and they're going to rip us out and replace them with a competitor. Or we've lost our executive sponsor, and there's a new team that's stepped in, and now they're owning the product, and they don't know anything about it, or they've got a competitive relationship, a stronger relationship with one of our competitors. And so in both of those scenarios, that's where that relationship and executive sponsorship at the high levels of the business organization can really help protect you. Again, the higher up you get, the better you can sort of weather these storms that happen inevitably across our customer base to ensure that you remain in there and you remain the vendor of choice. What's your experience, Vanilla?
I would agree with all of that, and I'm not going to echo it because I think Bob's done it justice. The other thing I would add from our experience is if you are a technology company and you live and breathe in a wider ecosystem, if you integrate with other things, or if you are, you know, in our case, we live in a desktop environment for a lot of our deployments. If that world changes and, you know, there's a cohort of your customers that are affected by that change or that use that product or affected by that integration, that's another risk factor because, you know, are you able to keep up with, can your product keep up with that change or can it facilitate whatever it is in time? You know, we would view that, we will be watching that as well and considering that a churn risk potentially.
Okay, back over to you, Eleanor. Who assigns the account health to pre-sales, implementation, et cetera? How do you avoid a conflict of interest here?
Indeed. So I would say from our perspective, kind of going back to what I said at the start, our health framework was designed to create calmness, so operational calmness. That's what we use our health framework for. Churn prevention ultimately, but it's about allowing us to move more quickly as a business. And so for that reason, it tends to be, in our case, the cooler heads in the company who do the ranking or put the kind of define the health. That doesn't mean that we don't take valuable input from the wider space because sometimes our PMs are out in site with their customers and they learn something, they learn a merger's happening and a CSM doesn't quite pick up on it or it happens between meetings. It doesn't mean that our sales teams don't bring in valuable information. And it's also, it's not like any one individual or any one individual piece of information, except for the trump cards, you know, dictates account health. It is a multifaceted piece. There are contributing pieces that kind of amount up to the overarching health. So, you know, in our world, we have different products and different teams running those products and different teams running the pre-sales, implementation, post-sales piece. So you can have different people moving in and out of the account. And so in a world where we choose to model our pre-sales, our implementations, our kind of business as usual piece, there are there are a group of people contributing to that, is how I would describe it.
We don't really have a health score in the pre-sale stage. So for us, it's something that sort of comes into play once we move into implementation and then ongoing adoption. So for us, it doesn't extend sort of to that early stage of the customer engagement. But assigning the health at sort of starting at implementation stage, that's where we look at those engagement factors to see, are they engaged with our services team, yes or no? If not, that in and of itself can be a red flag, because obviously then the question is, well, who's doing the implementation? Who's going to get them up and running? Get them time to value as quickly as possible. If there is an engagement, then how is that tracking? And that's maybe the softer bit that some of this question is after. But for us, it simply has to do with milestones. Based upon the project plan, are we meeting milestones? And is the project progressing in a timely manner as expected by the initial sort of statement of work and project plan that was put together? If it's significantly delayed, then that becomes a big area of risk for us.
Next.
Go ahead.
So the next one, how accurate is your health score at predicting renewals? Do you have data that supports the correlation? Go first.
How accurate is our health score at predicting renewals? We debate this a lot internally as well, because we have renewal rate targets and we have health score targets. And those two things are different. And executive management more and more is saying, if the health score target is here and the renewal rate target is here, how do you explain the difference? How can you say you've got, let's say, 95% health, but you've only got 88% sort of renewal retention rates? Those aren't our exact numbers, so don't quote me on that, but let's say it's not too far off. And so I think there is a gap there, and that's why for us internally, more and more, we're looking for ways of how we can continue to iterate the health score to be more accurate and reflective of the actual renewal numbers themselves. The data that we have are those two separate metrics that we measure on a regular basis. But figuring out where that delta is, for us, is going to be the key in terms of aligning them and bringing them more closely together so that the health score number really can become a very accurate forecasting tool.
Yeah, I mean, I would say from our perspective, the top 50% of our revenue, really accurate. And we have a very low churn rate, partly because we're in the legal space and they don't like change, but partly because we're good at what we do. But in the same way that I suppose the top 50% of our revenue gets white glove treatment in that they are managed accounts, they also get white glove treatment internally in that the data is looked after for them very carefully. In the bottom space, we're not so good, is my honest answer.
Yeah, okay. Okay, we've got 2 minutes left here. Let's see how many more we can get through in the time remaining. So, Eleanor, do your CSMs get involved in the onboarding phase? If not, how do you ensure a seamless handover?
Yes, they do. Our CSMs do get involved in the onboarding phase, and actually, this is my personal opinion, not necessarily entirely what we do, but in my view, I like to see the handover happening early. I like to see whoever's going to be, and I think there's not just one handover. You know, you can call it the post-sales or the kind of the line between the sales cycle and the post-sales world, but there's probably actually a lot more delicate handovers in between. If you've got implementation phases and you've got solution consultants or you've got professional services, and I can go on and on and on. But for me, it's really important that whatever phase you're handing over, or that handovers always happen before the event. So to answer this specifically, if a CSM is doing the onboarding, you know, that they get involved just before the onboarding happens, whoever is running that. But yes, our CSMs, to be black and white, do get involved in onboarding.
I want to hear from all of you. How many of your CSMs get involved in the onboarding phase? That looks like half, probably, or so. So yes, our CSMs get involved, but typically sort of the first tip of the spear, if you will, is the services team. So professional services get engaged, and they're doing that deployment. CSMs are there sort of along for the ride, if you will, in the beginning stages. But it's really the services team that gets the customer up and running and using the product, and then the CSM team owns the relationship going forward from there. So it's kind of a partnership, if you will, for us at Okta between CSMs and services. We've got time for one more quick one. Last one. Do you align health scores with different business goals? Eleanor?
Yes.
You do.
And they change. And probably the best example I can give you is probably the environment situation I mentioned a moment ago, just to be fast. The environments change all the time. We need to stay on top of that. Sometimes it'll come in and come out the relevance of stuff happening outside our organization. And so we have business goals aligned around that.
Yeah, I would say the same thing, absolutely. As the product changes, as the strategy changes, we go back and we realign sort of the health target. Although the question here is the health score. And we can see that sometimes from time to time, as we're developing new aspects of the product that maybe aren't being as adopted as quickly as we would like them to, that can affect the health score. And that's the sort of flag then that for us causes us to go back internally and take a second look at how we are strategically supporting our customers and how we're proactively working with them to make sure that they're adopting these newer aspects of the product along the way as well. So with that, it tells us on the screen here in big red letters that our time is up. Thank you everyone very much for your time. Eleanor and I are around afterwards if you want to have a chat. Thanks for your questions.
Thank you very much.
Pulse Europe 2018 will continue after a 15-minute break.
Should I stay or should I go? If you say that you are mine,